June 16, 1462. Inside the Ottoman camp, 80,000 soldiers try to sleep. But sleep does not come easily tonight. Outside the walls of Târgoviște, the greatest army ever assembled in the Balkans waits. Tents stretch across the landscape as far as a man can see. Tomorrow they should control this land. Tomorrow the war should be over. What the soldiers don't know is this. At this very moment, 5,000 Wallachian fighters are moving through the night toward them. They move quietly. They move with purpose. They have been waiting for this moment. Their target is specific. Not the army. Not the supply wagons. Not even the generals. Him, the one man whose death could end this entire war in a single moment. The Sultan himself, Mehmed II. By dawn, what happens in the next hours will force the greatest power in the world to do something it has never done before. Something it swore would never happen. Retreat. This is how a small state challenged an empire. This is how 5,000 men nearly killed a sultan. This is the night attack that shook the Ottoman world. And this is how everything changed. For decades, Wallachia existed in a cage that had no bars. Not quite conquered by the Ottoman Empire. Not quite independent. Trapped in the space between. This was the life of a tributary state. Every year, silver flowed south to the Sultan in Constantinople. Every year, a tribute was paid, not the tribute of a defeated enemy, but the tribute of a vassal. A state that existed only as long as the empire allowed it to exist. And there was something worse than gold. Young boys, Christian youths from frontier regions, were taken north. Removed from their families. Trained to serve Ottoman masters. Transformed into janissaries. This levy, called the devşirme, was the empire's way of saying, even your children belong to us now. When Vlad III Dracula returned to the Wallachian throne in 1456, he understood this system better than most. He had lived it. He had spent his youth as a hostage in the Ottoman court, a guarantee that his father would obey. He had watched how the empire operated from inside. How it punished defiance. How it rewarded compliance. And then something changed in Constantinople. 9 years before Vlad's defiance, the Ottoman Empire had conquered Constantinople itself. The greatest Christian city in the world had fallen. Emperor Mehmed II had spent years consolidating his power after that victory, proving to the world that resistance to Ottoman expansion was futile. Resistance meant annihilation. Submission meant survival. But by 1461, Vlad made a choice that no tributary state had made before. He stopped paying the tribute. He ended the levy of boys. And his armies began crossing the Danube into Ottoman-controlled territory. What followed was not a single raid. It was systematic destruction. Tax collectors were hunted down and killed. Administrative centers were burned. Garrisons were overrun. Everything that allowed the Ottoman Empire to extract wealth and control from this region was targeted. Vlad was not asking for independence. He was demanding it with fire and blood. For the Ottoman Empire, this was intolerable. Mehmed II had just finished proving that conquest was inevitable. A small Wallachian ruler openly defying him threatened that entire message. If Wallachia could resist, what would stop Hungary? What would stop Moldavia? What would stop the entire frontier from rising up? In early spring 1462, the decision was made. Not negotiation. Not another payment to restore peace. Vlad III Dracula would be removed from power. A ruler willing to restore tributary order would be installed. The frontier would be secured through force, if necessary. By April 1462, the Ottoman army began to move. What was about to unfold would be unlike any campaign the empire had fought before. When the Ottoman army crossed the Danube, contemporary accounts place its size between 80 and 100,000 men. To understand what that number means, imagine an entire city on the march. A city of soldiers. Vlad could field perhaps 10 to 15,000 fighters at most. The mathematics of this war had already been decided before the first clash. The Ottomans brought the janissaries, the professional corps of the imperial army. These were not conscripts or levies. These were trained soldiers paid directly by the state. They had been trained since childhood. They fought in tight formations. They understood discipline. They were the shock troops of the Ottoman Empire, and they had never met an enemy they could not overcome. They brought the Sipahi cavalry, the heavy cavalry. These were landholders obligated to military service, riding horses worth more than villages, armored in protection that could turn aside arrows. When they charged, formations broke. When they charged, armies died. They brought light cavalry for reconnaissance and harassment. Units designed to probe ahead, to raid settlements, to soften resistance before the main army arrived. They brought engineers, cannons, and siege equipment. This was not a punitive raid designed to strike quickly and withdraw. This was the full apparatus of imperial conquest. And what did Wallachia possess? Light cavalry. Fast riders. Men who knew this land intimately. Men who could move quickly through forests and across rivers that the Ottoman army could not navigate easily. But they had no chance in open battle. None. If Vlad attempted to concentrate his forces and fight a pitched engagement, the Ottoman army would encircle and annihilate them in a single afternoon. Every Wallachian commander understood this. The numbers were impossible. The technology favored the Ottomans. The logistics favored the Ottomans. Everything about this war, measured in conventional terms, was lost before it began. So Vlad made a decision that changed everything. He would not defend cities. He would not meet the Ottoman army on conventional ground. He would not attempt to win battles. Instead, he would make the empire's own strength, its size, its supply lines, its reliance on logistics, into a weapon against itself. He would strip the land bare. As the Ottoman army pushed north into Wallachia in late April, villages disappeared ahead of them. Not from battle. From choice. Vlad had ordered a scorched-earth policy across the entire region. Everything that could sustain an army of 80,000 men had to be destroyed. Families fled into forests with whatever they could carry. Children, the elderly, the sick, all disappeared ahead of the Ottoman advance. Those who hesitated, who tried to hide, often did not survive. They were caught between retreating Wallachian forces and advancing Ottoman troops, and they died in that gap. Wells were poisoned or filled with stones. Crops were burned before harvest. Mills were destroyed. Any animal that could have fed the army was killed or driven away into the mountains. When Ottoman foraging parties went out to find supplies, they found nothing. Villages were empty shells. Fields were ash. Wells were poisoned. The scouts returned to report that the land offered nothing. Reconnaissance units that should have encountered light resistance found only silence. Empty roads. Abandoned settlements. No enemies to fight. No supplies to seize. Just absence. Days passed, then weeks. The Ottoman army continued its advance, but every mile was more costly than the last. The supply lines from Ottoman territory stretched longer and longer. What had once been a 2-week march from the main depots was becoming a 3-week march. Then 4 weeks. Every additional day meant more supplies consumed. More horses worn down. More men weakened. Horses began to die. Not from combat. From hunger and exhaustion. Ottoman cavalry, the shock troops of the army, were losing their mounts. A cavalryman without a horse was no longer a shock troop. He was a foot soldier. The army was being dismantled piece by piece without any major engagement. Men began to weaken. Rations were reduced because supplies were running short. The heat was relentless. The water was often poor quality, sometimes poisoned by Vlad's forces. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Men collapsed from dysentery. Disease spread through the camps like fire. Not the kind of disease that kills quickly. The kind that kills slowly. Fever. Dysentery. Infections from wounds that would not heal. The kind of sickness that accumulates. Each day another man is too weak to march. Another man falls behind. Another man dies in a ditch beside the road. The army did not collapse. Ottoman discipline was too strong for that. But something more dangerous happened. The army became uncertain. Soldiers could not predict what would happen next. Officers could not point to a clear objective. The campaign had no shape. It was just forward motion into uncertainty. And all the while, Vlad's forces remained unseen. They did not attempt to hold ground. They did not build fortifications. Instead, they harassed. Small attacks on foraging parties. Quick strikes on isolated units. Then withdrawal before the main Ottoman army could respond. Never a battle. Never a confrontation the Ottomans could actually win. Just constant pressure. Constant bleeding. By mid-June, after nearly 2 months of campaigning, Mehmed II faced a problem he had never encountered. An army that could not move forward effectively. An enemy that would not stand and fight. A campaign that offered no decisive moment, no victory condition that could be achieved. And winter was coming. If the campaign continued through autumn, it would become exponentially harder. Supply lines would fail completely. Disease would accelerate. The army would begin to starve. By early June, the Ottoman army reached Târgoviște, the capital of Wallachia. In any conventional war, the capture of a capital marks a turning point. The capital houses the treasury, the government, the symbols of legitimate rule. Taking it usually means the war is nearly over. Mehmed II expected to find defenders here. A last stand. A siege that would prove Wallachian desperation. A moment where he could crush the remaining organized resistance. What he found instead was nothing. The city had been evacuated. The population was gone. The government machinery had been removed or destroyed. The capital had been left as a shell. A place with buildings but no function. Vlad had understood something crucial. Holding a city only matters if that city gives you something. If it provides supplies, revenue, intelligence, or the possibility of breaking enemy morale. An empty city provides nothing. Mehmed II entered Targoviste and immediately realized the truth. He could occupy the city. He could control the streets. But he could not control the countryside. He could hold buildings but not the population. There was no functioning administration to seize, no treasury to plunder, no local officials he could replace with Ottoman appointees. The occupation solved nothing. It created a new problem. The Ottoman army now occupied an exposed position deep inside hostile territory, surrounded by countryside it could not control. Every road in and out of the city remained unsafe. Foraging parties were still attacked. Messages moved slowly. Supply convoys had to be heavily guarded. Soldiers in the city could not sleep easily. The walls provided some protection, but not security. Not real security. An enemy that had demonstrated the ability to strike into the heart of the camp could strike here too. And Vlad's forces had not been destroyed. They remained at large, still capable of operations, still controlling the surrounding territory. The campaign had not ended. It had simply shifted location. By June 16th, the Ottoman army was exhausted. Not from battle. From campaign. From months of marching through devastated territory, of sleeping in camps where security was never certain, of watching supplies run short, of watching men sicken and die from disease rather than from enemy action. The soldiers tried to sleep. But sleep was difficult. In 3 months, there had been no decisive victory, no clear progress toward resolution, no sign that the campaign would end soon. The uncertainty was wearing. The exhaustion was becoming dangerous. What the Ottoman soldiers did not know, as they attempted rest in their tents on the night of June 16th, was that Vlad was about to make his most dangerous move. A move that could end the entire campaign in a single night. Or cost him everything. Vlad had made a calculation. The Ottoman army's greatest strength was its organization. Its command structure. Its ability to coordinate the movement of 80,000 men. If he could disrupt that coordination, if he could create enough chaos that the army could not stabilize, he might accomplish what direct combat could never achieve. His primary objective was specific. Kill or capture Mehmed II. The Ottoman campaign depended on centralized command. If the Sultan died, if he was captured, the army might fragment. It might withdraw. The certainty that had held it together would collapse. Vlad divided his forces into small, independent units. Each unit had a specific target. Each unit had a specific withdrawal route. Some fighters wore Ottoman-style clothing, enough to move past sentries in darkness. There was no single plan. There was instead a series of coordinated strikes designed to collapse order from multiple directions simultaneously. At midnight, or perhaps slightly after, accounts differ, the attack began. Wallachian units moved through the darkness toward the Ottoman camp. Some were detected and had to fight their way past sentries. Others slipped past. The confusion of a massive camp at night worked in their favor. Fires broke out across the camp. Not from a single source. From multiple locations. Tents were deliberately cut down. Supply stores were set ablaze. The fires served two purposes. They created light and chaos, but they also lit up the camp in a way that made coordinated response difficult. Where was the main attack? Where should officers direct their men? Soldiers woke to chaos. Complete chaos. Not an organized attack they could counter. Not an enemy position they could assault. Chaos. Disorder. The thing armies fear most because it makes the skills they have trained for useless. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. You cannot hold a position when you cannot find your unit. Men grabbed weapons in darkness, unsure which direction to face. Officers tried to form units and failed. Units that looked organized fell apart when they encountered flames or unexpected resistance. Vlad's forces did not stay to fight. That was the crucial element. They struck and withdrew. They created a crisis in one location, then moved to create a crisis elsewhere. The attack was designed to prevent the Ottoman army from consolidating a response. Each time a unit tried to form up, another attack would emerge elsewhere, pulling resources away. For the first time in the campaign, the Ottoman soldiers experienced genuine fear. The fear of vulnerability. The fear of not knowing where the enemy was. The fear of an enemy that could strike at the heart of their camp. The killing blow was meant for the center. Vlad had concentrated his best fighters on a single objective: reach the tent where Mehmed II should be, kill him, and withdraw. They reached the position. They fought through the guards. The stakes were absolute. One side was fighting to kill an emperor. The other was fighting to save one. In the darkness and chaos, they struck down a high-ranking Ottoman commander. A man of importance. But not the man they sought. Not Mehmed II. The moment of failure came only after the commitment was complete. As dawn approached, the Ottoman army began to stabilize. Units reorganized, discipline reasserted itself. The Ottoman response grew stronger. Vlad's forces, having accomplished what they could, withdrew. By the time full light came, the Ottoman army controlled the camp. When the sun rose fully, the Ottoman army took stock. Thousands of soldiers were dead or wounded. Supply stores had been destroyed. Horses had been killed or scattered. The material losses were significant. But none of that mattered as much as one fact. One single, undeniable fact. They were not safe. Surrounded by 80,000 men, with the greatest disciplined army in the world, they were not safe. The enemy had reached them. The enemy could kill them. Even here. Even with these numbers. After the night attack, the Ottoman army could not afford to stay in one place. Stationary camps were vulnerable. Mehmed ordered the army to move. East and north, probing for Vlad's forces, searching for a final confrontation that would end this war. But as columns advanced, moving away from Târgoviște, something changed in the air. Scouts reported something ahead. Something on the roads. Something that made even hardened Ottoman soldiers pause. At first, it was just a smell. Not the smell of battle. Something different. Something wrong. The stench of death. Not fresh death. Old death. Death that had been rotting in the sun for days. The kind of smell that clings to your throat and makes you gag. Scouts advanced cautiously. What they were seeing did not make immediate sense. Shadows on the landscape. Movement? No, not movement. Something standing. Something still. Something arranged. They realized what they were seeing only gradually. Wooden stakes. Rows of them. Stretching across the landscape. Not a few. Not dozens but thousands. Contemporary accounts place the number in the thousands. Some say 5,000. Some say more. The exact number is less important than the scale. This was not a mass grave. This was a forest. A forest made of wood and bodies. The bodies were arranged deliberately. They lined the main approach roads. They were placed where the Ottoman army could not avoid them. Where every unit had to see. Where every officer had to count. Ottoman soldiers had to walk past them. Column after column. hour after hour. They could not turn aside. They could not escape the sight. This was the message Vlad was sending, and it had to be received. There was something wrong about the silence. In a normal landscape there are sounds. Birds, insects, the rustling of small animals. But here, there was only silence. The silence of death. When Mehmet II himself reached the scene, the accounts become more detailed. The Sultan stopped. He examined the display. He understood immediately what he was seeing. This was not madness. This was not rage. This was strategy. This was a message sent without negotiation, without words, without the possibility of misunderstanding. Vlad was saying, if you continue to advance, this is what will happen to your men. This is the price of pushing further. This is what resistance costs. From that moment forward, the Ottoman army marched knowing this. Every additional mile north meant that more of their men would be impaled. More of their comrades would become part of this forest. The psychological pressure was absolute. The message was inescapable. Mehmet II was a practical commander. He understood strategy. He understood cost and benefit. And he understood that the cost of continuing this campaign was becoming untenable. By late June and into July, Mehmet II faced a decision that no Ottoman Sultan had faced before. Continue or withdraw. Continue forward toward Hungary? The supply lines were already fragile. Another 100 miles of march and they would break completely. The army would begin to starve. Continue the occupation? The night attack had proven that even occupying a city and controlling territory did not provide security. The army would continue to bleed men from disease and raids. What about Hungary? Ottoman scouts reported that Hungarian forces were watching. If the campaign continued, if Ottoman troops pushed deeper into Central Europe, Hungarian intervention became possible. And a two-front campaign, against Wallachia and Hungary simultaneously, could not be won. The central objective, destroying Vlad III Dracula as a military threat, had not been achieved. Vlad's core forces remained mobile and operational. They had not been trapped. They had not been decisively defeated. They had been bypassed. And for what? Wallachia was valuable strategically, but it was not valuable economically. It could not support the occupation of 80,000 troops. It could not provide enough revenue to justify the expense of a prolonged campaign. The mathematics had changed. Victory was no longer achievable at an acceptable cost. The campaign had become a liability rather than an asset. The order was given. Withdraw south of the Danube. The Ottoman army withdrew in good order. This was not a rout. The soldiers did not panic. The discipline held. But discipline could not change the fundamental fact. The Ottoman Empire had entered Wallachia to destroy Vlad III Dracula and failed. It was leaving without that objective accomplished. The greatest army in the world, which had begun this campaign with absolute confidence, was crossing back over the Danube. The campaign that was supposed to be decisive, that was supposed to eliminate a tributary threat and restore order, was ending without victory. The Ottoman withdrawal did not mean peace. It meant a shift in strategy. The Ottoman Empire would not abandon its interests in Wallachia. But the method would change. Mehmet II recognized that direct military occupation was too expensive. Instead, he would pursue indirect control. He identified an alternative ruler, Radu the Handsome, Vlad's younger brother. Radu had spent much of his life within Ottoman circles and was seen as predictable and cooperative. The shift in strategy found support among Wallachia's own nobles. The boyars had been weakened by the war. Their lands were devastated. Their incomes were disrupted. Vlad's methods, his executions of nobles he suspected of disloyalty, his intolerance of perceived challenges to his authority, had secured control during the crisis but created resentment during peace. As Radu advanced with Ottoman backing, support for Vlad quietly evaporated. Not through open revolt. Through withdrawal of cooperation. Garrisons were denied supplies. Messages went unanswered. The authority that had held during the military campaigns simply dissolved. By late 1462, Vlad's position became untenable. He was not defeated in battle. He was isolated politically. Without the loyalty of the boyars, without popular support, Without resources to maintain power, he could not govern. He fled Wallachia, seeking assistance from Hungarian rulers. The man who had defied an empire was forced into exile. Radu took the throne with Ottoman backing. For the Ottoman Empire, this was a practical success. A cooperative ruler was installed. Tributary order was restored. The frontier was stabilized. The empire had adapted. Military force had failed. Now it would use political pressure and indirect control. The lesson was clear. In some places, occupation was too expensive. Cooperation was preferable. But the longer-term consequences were more complex. Wallachia had demonstrated something unprecedented. A small state had imposed costs on a great power that changed how that power operated. Across Europe, the story spread. Some portrayed Vlad as a defender of Christendom, a ruler who had challenged Ottoman expansion when others hesitated. Others presented him as a brutal tyrant whose methods had made him legendary for the wrong reasons. What mattered was that his name became synonymous with resistance, with the idea that empires could be resisted, with the proof that a small state could force a great power to recalculate. The night attack at Targoviste did not end with triumph. The Sultan was not killed. The empire was not destroyed. Wallachia did not become independent. By conventional measures, it was not a victory. The Ottoman Empire remained the greatest power in the world. Its expansion continued. Its authority was absolute in most places. One failed campaign did not change that reality. What changed was how the empire understood its own power. The campaign taught a lesson that shaped Ottoman policy for decades. Direct conquest, when it required occupying difficult terrain against a population that refused to surrender, was expensive. Cooperation was cheaper. Political pressure was more effective than military force. In subsequent campaigns and frontier management, the Ottomans shifted toward indirect control. They preferred cooperative rulers to occupying forces. They preferred political pressure to military presence. The lesson from Wallachia rippled outward. Vlad III Dracula did not win a war. What he did was prove that power depended on more than numbers, more than discipline, more than resources. A small state with nothing but knowledge of terrain and refusal to fight on expected terms had forced a great power to reconsider its entire approach to conquest. The night attack did not destroy an army. It shattered an assumption. The assumption that overwhelming force guaranteed control. That submission was inevitable. In that moment, when a small nation refused to accept the empire's calculations, when it proved that the cost of conquest could exceed the benefits of control, the rules of power changed. Not immediately, not completely, but changed. Empires expand by winning battles. They endure by managing costs. In 1462, those costs became visible. And visible costs change behavior. The night attack that was supposed to be forgotten became the moment that changed everything. Not through victory, but through the price of conquest. This marks the end of our documentary on the famous night attack that terrified the Ottomans. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing to the channel for more focused history documentaries on battles, sieges, and conflicts that shaped the medieval and early modern world.